In this panel discussion, we'll be talking about meaningful sustainability and how brands can and already are moving beyond just the marketing. Joining me today is Rabije, Cekovic, Senior Chemist for Research and Innovation at SkinCeuticals that you heard from earlier today. Alison Page, Creative Director at the National Aboriginal Design Agency. Maggie Hewitt, founder of Maggie Marilyn. And Mary Lou Ryan, co-founder of Bassike. Just a reminder to everyone that you can ask questions to anyone in our panel using the link on the screen. To kick us off, Maggie, I'd love to start with you on the topic of supply chains.
Yeah, hello. Hi, everyone.
It's here that often some of the most unsustainable practices can occur. So for us all, could you please talk us through what a traditional fashion supply chain from start to finish looks like?
Yeah.
And what an ethical and sustainable supply chain can look like?
Of course. Well, in traditional garment creation, there's usually 4 tiers to manufacturing. So there's your first tier, which is cut and sew and manufacturing, and then there's your second tier, which is fabric production, and then your third tier, which is weaving, spinning of the fibre, and then your fourth tier, which is the cultivation of your raw fibre. And I guess what might surprise most consumers is that I think it's rare to know, for brands to know beyond their second tier in their supply chain. And I guess the problem with that is how can you even aim to better your supply chain if you don't even know where everything comes from in the first place? And that is really where people fall through the cracks, and we really don't understand the environmental impact of the clothing that we create. And when I first founded Maggie Marilyn, I guess I wasn't aware of this in the industry, that it wasn't common practice for you to know all tiers of the supply chain. And I remember asking our fabric wholesalers when I first started, where does the fibre come from? And they're like, why do you care? Why are you asking that question? And so, it's been such a learning journey over the last 5 years of building Maggie Marilyn. It all really just starts by asking the question, and I think that's where consumers come into play, and it's so important to ask those questions of the brands that you support. And so, yeah, I think an ethical supply chain is one that first is rooted in transparency, where a brand knows exactly where their garment is sold, manufactured, where the fabric is created, where the fibre is spun, woven, and then again where the fibre itself is grown and cultivated.
I think we're definitely moving in that direction. As Annabelle said earlier, people's priorities are shop local, it was responsible, and shop green. So I think we're definitely moving in the right direction. Yeah. Mary Lou, on a similar sort of topic, what has been your approach in setting up Bassike's supply chain in a way that you can manage and track exactly what's happening?
Yeah, so 2 years ago, I moved into co-founder of Bassike, but I also moved into sort of heading up the sustainability and supply chain. And one of the most important things that we wanted to do was really to be able to talk to our customer really authentically, and to make sure that when we are talking about our products and where they're made and where they're from, we could actually, put our hand on our heart and actually say, this is what we're doing. So we kind of applied, created like a methodology which was called SEMI, which is a Sustainable Ethical Manufacturing Index, which allowed us to go through our entire supply chain, and quite similar, a lot of brands just work directly back with either a fabric agent. With Bassike, we have always worked directly with our fabric mills and also directly with our manufacturing partners. So, partnership was really important to us to be able to have those conversations, to be able to walk into their factories and see what they're making. And so we built, a data-driven methodology which was built on either published information or certification from our supply chain. And that was really important because that just really allowed us to go through our whole product assortment, talk about the products that we felt were part of our long-term vision, and products that we felt did not fit any longer in our brand DNA. We were able to exit them and replace them.
Great. Alison, manufacturing locally using traditional methods and working with communities at a really micro level means that First Nations creatives can be pretty authentically sustainable. How could other brands take cues from these textile designers so they could follow suit themselves?
Okay, so I think I have to kind of take the conversation to a philosophical level and talk about the Aboriginal connection to country. So when Aboriginal people connect to country, we're talking about the land, the sea, the sky, and everything in it, the plants, the animals. And when we talk about country like it's a family member, so it's all animate. So there's no such thing as inanimate objects. And when we think about country, it's like a family member. So we care for country, we sing to country, we long for country, we worry about country. So we have this deep relationship. But when you start to bring material items into the picture, and that includes the modern world, contemporary architecture, even our traditional objects, you can kind of see that, that was just an extension of country. And the reason why is very important. It's because Aboriginal people didn't have the written word. So the way that we wrote down the vast amounts of ecological and cultural data that we needed to survive, and I think we were pretty good at surviving because, survived Ice Age, was to write them into stories. And those stories found their way into art forms, into designs, into song, onto cave paintings, and to the markings we made onto our skin, onto all of our artefacts. They were encoded, all of that ecological data was encoded into stories which were etched and carved, not only into all of our objects, but into geographic locations. So you sort of need to get your head around that before you start thinking about, well, how can a brand kind of engage in that world? And I think it's a very exciting world to engage in, because when you see these designs, these Aboriginal designs, they're not just aesthetic decoration. You are looking at the library of the dreaming. This is a very, very deep concept that I think, is all about storytelling. And I think that is a really exciting world to unpack. But I think it takes time. It takes time to unpack that. But also, I think these are the stories the world wants to hear.
Definitely, most definitely. Rabije, changing tack slightly to the beauty industry, supply chain issues have affected the industry for the last 24 months pretty dramatically. I think you'd agree. What has SkinCeuticals and L'Oreal's approach been to navigating this, being that it's such a huge company?
Being the large company that it is, L'Oreal's reach extends wide and far. And as such, we have the capability of sourcing our ingredients globally and diversifying those sources. We have entire teams dedicated to this diversification. And what that means for us is that we have the ability to source one ingredient from multiple locations. So if there's ever a shortage or a discontinuation with a raw material, we can likely often move from one source into another, and that's a luxury that smaller companies might not have.
Moving back onto fashion. Maggie, I'm sure you would agree that the term sustainable fashion is pretty unregulated. So what are some misconceptions in the space that you've come across that might have bothered you in the past?
So many misconceptions. I guess probably the word sustainability itself, it's such a broad umbrella term. And yeah, I think that at Maggie Marilyn, we really try to break it down into 3 pillars that we live by, which is, people, planet, prosperity. And, that is sort of our guiding light, I guess, in terms of, all decisions that happen in the business and how they fall under the mission statement of those 3 elements. But yeah, there's lots of misconceptions for sure.
Mary Lou, on the subject of traceability, how do consumers genuinely know where their products are coming from, if they can at all? Are there any resources you can share with us or advice on what to look out for?
Yeah, look, I think, when you look at, there's lots of different provenances, I think, when you look at a garment, one thing that you do know, if you are buying, a product like a basic product and it's made in Australia, you can generally say that it's made in Australia. I think where things become really hard, especially for brands that are manufacturing offshore, because, if you're buying a finished product, let's just say from offshore, you don't necessarily know where the garment's actually made. You don't necessarily know where the raw materials are coming from, or let alone even the fabric are coming from. So, I think... especially I think through the pandemic time, people have actually really reset their expectations around wanting to. There's more questions being asked about where their garments are coming from, who's making my garments, and I think obviously if you can turn your product inside out, obviously there's a country of origin there on your garments, but I think as an industry, we have got such a long way to go. There is it's an unregulated industry. That is making it very, very difficult for brands to actually even, we're quite fortunate that we've started on this journey, have been doing it for a long time, but it is very unregulated. And I think until we start to get regulation right through from the growers and the farmers, right through to the spinners, to the weavers, the garment makers, and there's global regulation, we're not going to see any changes happening to the industry. I mean, there's modern slavery issues, there's biodiversity issues. It's huge, and brands, we carry the responsibility and the burden of the whole industry. So the more pressure that we put on as brands to say this is actually how we want to manufacture, this is what we want to do with our garments, and this is the brand we want to stand for, is when we're going to start to see real change. But yeah, it's very difficult, I think, for the consumers to really honestly say, the product that they're buying from, unless they're buying it from a brand that is specifically is actually out there doing the work.
Aside from sort of the brand telling the story, are there any sort of resources you've come across that a consumer could tap into, or is it really incumbent on the brand to...
Look, it's really, there's so much, obviously certification, is a big one, whether it's FSC certified viscose or GOT certification, but that becomes a whole other issue in itself, that just becomes a risk management issue for a business. I don't think there is really any governing body that is actually talking to that, but just even over the last couple of years, even just the connection between growers and farmers and brand is actually becoming, the conversation is starting, and I think that's when we're going to really start to see change, because before the brand or the designer would go, well, I don't really care where it's coming from. Now the conversation is actually starting, and the cotton growers are having conversations with the brand, and that's where we're going to get transparency, we're going to get traceability. So, sustainability is one part of, the holistic, format of creating something. It's transparency, traceability, sustainability, longevity, design, quality, value, like that sort of builds the proposition.
Alison, I'll direct my next question to you. The supply chain also includes what happens after the products are actually sold. Your latest project with Breville saw that 100% of the profits went to First Nations foundations. So how can brands introduce effective altruism in their supply chains in every step of the way?
I just want to riff off what you were talking about, because for me, it all comes down to storytelling. And I think that, when Breville... Actually, I pitched that original idea with Breville at a wedding 16 years ago in Margaret River, and I got a call 3 years ago from Breville saying, we're ready now. And it was like,
great.
First of all, you're still in that job. I spoke to the head designer, he's an industrial designer and I'm a designer as well, so we were just talking. But amazingly, he's still in that company. And the reason why is that company, so Breville, had this kind of issue that they're this huge global brand, but no one knows they're Australian. Their headquarters is down the road in Alexandria. And so they were sort of thinking, hey, we should do a special range, collaborating with Aboriginal people, because what's more Australian than, we really want to align ourselves. But I think as the relationship developed, we really realised how much, they cared about sustainable food production and how Aboriginal people had this history of ancient grains, bread making. And so, our toaster became about ancient grains and the juicer became about traditional medicines. And so, these stories and, the coffee machine, there's a men's coffee machine, a women's coffee machine, they're all about ritual because drinking, I saw everyone for the ritual in behind me here. But I think it's just about storytelling. And so as those conversations between the makers and the designers and the growers start to happen, we ended up with 13 films, I think, at the end of the Breville project, which are all, it'll be this, everyone at first will just see these beautiful products, but then as you start to kind of engage with these objects, that's what I was saying before about how things become animate, they become animated through story. And I think that's what builds preciousness into objects. And as soon as you think something is precious, think about your family heirloom, think about something that you really care about. You're never going to throw it away, even if it stops working. So we need to start, I think, building this preciousness through storytelling into objects. Really? And if you want to give away 100% of your profits, then that's great. But, Breville's got heaps of money. They can do it.
I'd like to direct this question to the whole group. Marilyn, you touched on this earlier, but do you all think, or would you like there to be more regulation or a third-party verification body to kind of regulate what brands can and can't say about sustainability? Maggie, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that needs to happen, but I think there needs to be change at a government level for how brands are actually able to manufacture a product in the first place, because that's really where the impact is coming from. But yeah, and I think that's really where technology comes into play, and can really support in validating transparency throughout a supply chain. And that's something that is reasonably new to us in terms of we've just started working with a business called Fibertrace, with a grower of ours, Good Earth Cotton, which is Australian cotton grown here in New South Wales, and they've created a technology where we have a scanner and you can basically scan the t-shirt or whatever the cotton is in, and it basically comes up with green lights to authenticate and say, this is the cotton that we say it is. So I think that's really where the industry needs to head.
Marilyn, you touched on earlier, but did you want to elaborate at all?
Yeah, look, I think, I think what's really important for the industry is that absolutely is regulation, but I think we have to also acknowledge that it's going to be a bit of a pathway. And this is not just about cutting brands down and saying you're not sustainable, so we're going to counsel you. It's about what can we actually do to get everybody thinking. How can we share our knowledge? How can we put pressure on the industry, the government, to actually sort of start to create changes and pathways for brands to actually move into it? Because this issue about creating a fashion brand is bigger than the clothing. It has an environmental impact. It has, modern slavery issue. It's people, it's environment. So I think what we do need to do is pave the way and actually say, look, let's all get on board. Let's share our knowledge. Let's come together and actually create a really great industry, because we all love fashion. I love what we do, but we've got to be able to do it in a very purposeful way that doesn't have an impact that it actually currently does at the moment.
Alison, did you want to add your perspective onto?
Oh yeah, I think absolutely. I think it's about leadership and courage. I think you're going to move into risky territory. I think, but you have to sort of, I think, have the bravery to understand that you're going to be opening a door to others. And I think it's about value as well, like that. Ultimately, yes, it's going to be risky. You're going to be doing something that other people haven't done before. But I think, but creating meaning, I think, in people's lives. Let's strive for that rather than this sort of just, disposable and consumer sort of culture. It's actually about culture. It's actually about realising that we can let culture just happen to us. But, you know, one thing I think we can learn from, say, Aboriginal culture is that it can be purposeful. It can be driven into places that we want to take it. And being deliberate about that, being brave about that, and understanding that ultimately it will have value. You know, and it will affect the bottom line, obviously, but at the quadruple bottom line, the social, the environmental, the economic and the cultural outcomes for all of us.
Yeah. Bottom line wise, I feel like people will start getting on board though and flip that kind of traditional take on that regulation. Ravi, from a beauty perspective, in the beauty industry, there's lots of, you know, greenwashing going on and clean beauty is unregulated. So what do you think about having that verification in place?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with what these three ladies said, and I'm aligned on that. I would like to see more sustainability regulations surrounding beauty, and like Maggie said, I think it comes down to transparency. If we regulate our sustainability claims, that more or less standardizes them. You know, like we need definitions for what is organic, what is natural. And if we have that standardization, we would be able to allow consumers to kind of take two products and easily compare them, and they would be able to know which one really is more environmentally friendly than another. At L'Oreal, we have a lot of stringent sustainability policies in place, and L'Oreal as a group holds all of its brands to high standards, which honestly makes it harder as us for formulators, but we know it's worth it, and we all need to hold ourselves accountable. So I think that's where those regulations come into play.
On the subject of formulating, in terms of sourcing ingredients and creating beauty products, and particularly skincare products, how is a brand like SkinCeuticals doing things differently?
Yeah. When it comes to SkinCeuticals and sourcing our ingredients, we really try to source pure molecules wherever possible as opposed to derivatives. And not just that, but we do all of the testing that we need to determine the optimal concentration of those ingredients. Because more is not always better. A higher concentration doesn't always lead to a more efficacious product. It's really about determining what's bioavailable for the skin. Anything more than that, and your skin might not be able to use. So optimal efficacy is really where the question lies. When it comes to creating beauty products at SkinCeuticals, we do that with three key pillars in mind. And that is 1, scientific research, 2, collaboration with our physicians, and 3, very extensive testing. And I think that medical, integrated, professional-centric approach is what sets SkinCeuticals apart.
Mary Lou and Alison, this question's for the both of you. How hard do you think it is to really gain full visibility on your entire supply chains? What sort of steps are needed to confidently say that every single facet is traceable, given some bigger brands have hundreds, if not thousands, of primary and secondary suppliers? Alison?
Oh my God, you're talking business talk to me with supply chains. Look, I think it's just it really comes down to being committed to this idea that our relationship with materials has got to shift and change. And I think if you really are committed to that, where, you know, it's about understanding the material, where it's come from, who's picked it, who's processed it. I mean, all of that story, people are actually really interested in. I mean, we've seen it in other industries. You know, back to your regulation question, I mean, I come from architecture and design, right, and interiors. And so when regulation came into that area, you know, for 5 years, the architect, and this was in the late 90s, you know, and design was all, you know, Philip Stark, and it was all hedonism, and it was, you know, and, you know, interiors were being ripped out every 2 years, you know, I mean, it was crazy. And then this regulation came in, the industry freaked out. Then for 5 years, everyone was kind of like, you know, doing it badly. You know, actually, some people did it amazing, but the range of, you know, so this is what will happen in the fashion industry. You'll have people who do it amazingly and to really take their time and go to the, like, you know, to the nth degree. You're going to be out picking cotton yourself, like, telling the story. Love that. But there'll be others who just kind of like slap a brand on it, hope that it kind of just gets by. And I think that, but just to give you some hope, you know, we're 20-something years into sustainable construction and design in the built form, and we're really leading the world actually. You know, architecture and design, you know, it's become so sophisticated now, and we're really starting to take it to whole new levels where, you know, drains are being resurfaced. We're going to have, you know, a river running down Pitt Street before you know it. There is actually a river incarcerated underneath there. But anyway, it'll come out one day. But I think that's, you know, it'll happen in the fashion industry too, where, you know, the regular, like slowly, the true story and the value of the stories will overtake the kind of regulation, and it'll just become the way we do things.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question? I didn't say anything about supply chains. I don't think so.
More
Except
about
that you're going to
visibility.
pick cotton.
I love that.
Mary Lou, what's your take?
Can you ask me the question?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, sorry.
How hard do you find it to get full visibility on a whole supply chain?
Yeah, look, absolutely it is. I mean, for us, we're very conscious about the partnerships that we work with. So ultimately, you know, we really start with our partnerships, and that really is, you know, we've worked with pretty much the same supply chain in terms of our manufacturing for 16 years. You know, our fabric mill suppliers most of them have been with us for a minimum of 10 years. So we have that, you know, that connection with them, which I think is really important. But, you know, I think as an industry, you know, the traceability, the transparency, that's going to be, you know, the next sort of, you know, unlocking of our industry. And I think everyone's up for it. You know, you can see it certainly coming from the luxury brands, you know, right through, you know, even to businesses like Kmart. You know, everyone is talking about this mission to, you know, open up traceability and transparency, regulation. So it really is a movement. And I think, as you said, you know, it's going to take time, but the conversations have started. And it's only really in the last couple of years that it's really kind of like every brand, you know, needs to be having, you know, what's their environmental, you know, social kind of governance and mandatory. Yeah. Exactly. So, yeah, I'm excited. I think it's a wonderful step forward for the industry, and I think, you know, it's going to have such a positive impact on so many levels, because we are an industry. We create beautiful things. We make people feel good, and to be able to do that in a beautiful way where it has a knock-on effect and an impact across, you know, the whole industry. It's really powerful.
Definitely. I think we're running out of time, but Maggie, I'll direct our last question to you. Your label, Maggie Marilyn, announced a few years ago it would be moving away from the traditional seasonal calendar in the name of sustainability. So what benefits have you seen from this decision?
So many. And most importantly, having time. Time is such a precious thing. And having time to design slowly and mindfully and really get off that crazy hamster wheel that this industry is on. You know, I think churning out new collections every 3 months really didn't allow for time to solve problems and, you know, design with intention and to build strong, lasting relationships with our partners. You know, it's impacted so many elements of our business in terms of how we talk about sustainability in terms of how we create product, but our team, you know, the team aren't as burnt out anymore. That, you know, I think everyone enjoys the work that much more just because we have the time to invest in the product and give our customer the best product that we can whilst empowering, you know, everyone throughout our supply chain and hopefully having a regenerative impact on our environment.
We're going to do a range that has 6 Aboriginal seasons in a year, so hopefully there won't be 6 collections per year, but at least you'll learn about the real seasons of this continent.
Yeah. Another beautiful collaboration from a conversation. I'll just go through a few questions from our audience. Alison, for you, what do you think constitutional reform through the Uluru Statement can offer Indigenous creatives and the Australian fashion and beauty industry as a whole?
I think it's time that, like, Australians really, we really are engaging. The reconciliation movement is unbelievable. And I think we've seen that the push for the Uluru Statement from the heart has come from corporates. They're actually doing the heavy lifting, and they always have done, I think, pushing for constitutional reform. And now the Uluru Statement, that hasn't been led by the government, it's been led by people and by corporates. And I think that it's because, you know, I think Australia will truly mature when it actually takes Aboriginal culture and says it's at the centre of our national identity, and it's a centre of who we all are, and it's foundational, because you know, Aboriginal culture really is just about boating, camping, fishing. No, but we did that for work. Do you know what I mean? And it was like 7 to 14 hours a week. And then the rest of the time we just sat around in beautiful places and made art and told stories and had ceremony. You know, that's and lived sustainably. And I think that's a very sustainable and beautiful way to live. And I think that, you know, Aidan Ridgway, who used to lead the Democrats, he's a Gumbaynggirr man, he said, Australia will truly mature when it can look in the mirror and see its own Aboriginality. And I think that's what the Uluru Statement from the Heart's really about.
Thank you. One final question for the whole panel.
There's someone over there signed up for the movement. Thanks, Black Power.
One final question I'd like to direct to the whole panel. What kind of exciting emerging technologies will help textiles and beauty become more sustainable? Are there any you've seen yourselves? Mary-Lou, you're nodding?
Yeah, look, we're actually piloting a program at the moment which is using blockchain technology, which is very exciting. So we're piloting through a company called Blocktex, which takes excess raw materials and repurposes it. And we took our jersey collection to carbon neutral earlier on this year, and hopefully through this blockchain technology we'll be able to understand and reduce our carbon footprint by the blockchain technology, because that will be able to give us a format to use. So that's pretty exciting, and that kind of kicked off last week. So I think you know, I think for our industry we're going to have to move more into that space as well, where we bring data and technology and the work that we're doing. So yeah.
Anyone else seen any emerging technologies they're excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I spoke a little bit before about fibre trace. I'm someone that is like terrified of this whole metaverse situation. And blockchain, you know, it's incredibly complicated, but I do think that, yeah, technology, if used as a force for good, can be pretty powerful in solving a lot of the problems that we face, specifically in supply chain and fashion. And I think my dream is that one day, you know, you'll be able to just hover your iPhone over your clothes and it will tell you exactly, you know, where it's come from, previous owners of the product, you know, right back to where the fibre was grown and what the overall environmental impact and social impact was of that product. So I think that we'll get there, and that will be a pretty exciting day.
Everything crossed.
Yeah, put her in charge. That's a great idea.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you to all our panellists for joining us, and thank you to you all for being a lovely audience. That's all we have time for.
Thank you.